Отже, доброго дня всім, хто підключився сьогодні до нас. Я Марія Рибко, заступниця директора Центру економічної стратегії.
Good afternoon to everybody who has joined us. My name is Maria Rybko. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center of Economic Strategy. I'm very happy to welcome you at our today's event and the special topic, what prevents steel production from growing. We have together a lot of really good, interesting guests. I'm waiting for the discovery of the special topic, but in the first block, I would like to ask my colleagues to take the floor who have prepared this review. This event is conducted traditionally together with the German economic team, and the media partner of this event this time is GMK Center. This is the center of expertise and independent platform for dialogue on metallurgy and industry.
If you are listening to us and prefer English, please switch on the English translation in your Zoom panel.
Please leave your questions to the speakers, to the analytics of CES. Please do so in the Q&A section or in the chat, or if you are looking it via Facebook, then you can immediately put it right in the Facebook. I would like to welcome everybody, and I would like to ask Robert Kichner, Deputy Head of the German Economic Team and the Authorized Representative of the Berlin Economics. Robert, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Also, good afternoon and welcome from my side, from Berlin, to all our participants of our regular monthly economic discussion on developments in Ukraine. It is, as always, a great pleasure for us, for the German Economic Team, to continue our long-standing cooperation with the Center for Economic Strategy in supporting and in co-hosting this event together, which we have been already doing for quite some time. We, as a German Economic Team, are an economic policy advisory project funded by the German government, and we have been active in Ukraine for many, many years. So many stakeholders know us, but we're also active in other countries in the region, in the region of the Eastern Partnership of the EU, in the Balkans, and in Central Asia. Today's focus topic is the situation in the metallurgical sector, which obviously has many current challenges, and I think our panelists will address them. But also from a medium to long-term perspective, there are challenges, but also opportunities, and I think we will also focus on these topics in discussing these vital questions. And I think, as always, we have a great panel established with business representatives, with national expert, with international expert, and I'm very excited also to listen to their points of view later on. Having said that, I will now give the word back to Maria Rybko, as the Deputy Director of the Center for Economic Strategy, who will moderate the discussion. I think, Masha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for this introduction, and let us come to the review of the Ukrainian economy in September. We do this every month traditionally. Please follow us with our reviews on our website, and now our CES analytics. We'll talk about that. Maxim Samaluk, please, the floor is yours. Thank you, Maria. Let me start with some few words about some overall macroeconomic trends, then I will pass the floor to my colleagues who will follow other sectors of the industry. The real GDP of Ukraine in the second quarter grew by 3.7% compared to the similar period of last year. This was coming from the State Statistics Service. Such growth, or let's say recovery, because the Ukrainian economy is still recovering from what it has gone through since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. This is exactly up to the expectation that were put into the governmental forecasts in terms of growth of GDP for this year, and in terms of the other forecasts that the National Bank of Ukraine has done. In August 2024, GDP increased by 3.5% year-to-year, according to the Ministry of Economy, and within these 8 months, GDP growth is estimated at 3.9% year-to-year, also in line with the governmental expectations. And this said, based on the results of 2024, the GDP forecasts for 2024 vary from institution to institution. The worst forecast is given by IMF who believes in their last forecast that Ukraine will grow 3% in 2024. The Ministry of Economy and National Bank are more optimistic. They give the forecast 3.5 to 3.7% of growth. But the biggest optimism comes from the EBRD, who says that the GDP will grow by 4.7% this year. It will all depend on what would be the winter, how the energy system will end up. And we'll also talk about the metallurgical sector. In September, the expectations of business are in general softened. The NBU's business activity expectation index softened to 48.7 compared to 48.4 in August. What does it mean? It means that in general, the expectations of the business are still in the negative zone, meaning the majority of businesses believe, have the expectations that within the following months, the situation will be somewhat negative for them. Nevertheless, some businesses, some sectors have better expectations than others, especially the industry and trade, as well as construction. They have a somewhat better, mainly neutral trend. The worst is actually from the services, which is at 44.6%. Definitely, this insignificant change of September means that the business is waiting. The business is waiting to see how we will be meeting the upcoming months of November, December, what will be with the economy, what will be with the energy, how the situation will evolve. So I believe based on this summary of October and then based on the summary of November, we can see a more clear picture which exactly should be the expectations of the business. At this, my part is over, passing the floor to colleagues
Дякую,
onwards.
Максиме. Далі до
Thank
слова
you,
запрошуємо
Maxim. I would like to
Маша,
ask
аналітик
Maria
економічної
Tamilina.
стратегії, розкаже
Maria
про
is the analytic of the Center of Economic Strategy. She will tell about
Я сподіваюся, мене добре чутно.
monetary policy. I hope you can hear me well.
Зараз я тоді роблю демонстрацію. Так, все, добре. Отже, почнемо з
So let us start from the monetary policy.
Наші
As
ключові
usual,
ставки,
we say
відповідно,
about the key rate.
у вересні Національний банк
In
вирішив
September,
зберегти
the
облікову
National
ставку
Bank
на рівні
decided to
13%,
preserve the key
для того,
rate at the level of
щоб
13% in order.
чому так зберігається вже досить
Let me explain
довгий час
why
облікова
this is
ставка
taking
саме на цьому
such a
рівні,
long
для того,
time.
щоб
At this level, it is to bring the inflation in the closest years to 5%, also to keep people interested in savings in hryvnia and support the sustainability of the FX market. Also, the National Bank introduced certain decisions in terms of value of other instruments. In the first place, these are the 3 months DCs to 15.5% and refinancing loans to 16%. And still, from October 11th, the National Bank increased reserve requirements by 5 percentage points, with 60% of the reserves allowed in bonds, covering with benchmark of government bonds. With this, we see that nominal hryvnia interest rates have declined due to earlier monetary easing. Why? Because we still have the previous softening that took place some months ago of the monetary policy. But once again, we have to understand that the current hryvnia profitability exceeds the forecasted inflation, as well as those expectations of inflation that are prevalent. In September, inflation accelerated. It reached 8.6% year to year. The prices grew by 1.5% month to month. This is due to rising processed food prices, increased production expenses, especially when it comes to energy and payment of labor. And of course, there is still an ongoing pressure from the earlier hryvnia depreciation in the previous months. We understand that the inflation pressure will stay over the next few months because of the budgetary expenses and some disproportions at the labor market. And once the heating season starts, there could be some expectations from the deficit of electricity. Going about international reserves, they declined by 8.1% and amount to $38.9 billion. That is equal to 5 months of import coverage. Why this is taking place? The NBU has done FX interventions and also paid out some debt. So that's why we also had less money from international partners. If we talk about net FX exchange rate, it was fluctuating. Like in August, in September, we saw that the net FX demand rose due to seasonal factors. And in order to stabilize the FX market, the NBU increased the net FX sales to 3.2 billion and introduced some measures to prevent unproductive capital outflows. And talking about this spread between the official and the cash rate, it didn't exceed 1%. And that also talks what was happening with deposits. Actually, we see that the amounts of deposits on demand and in foreign currency, they continue to grow, while term deposits in both currencies remain quite stable. As was mentioned before, growth in household hryvnia term deposits stalled, likely because of deteriorating exchange rate expectations. And also, we understand that the expenditures of the population rose. If we talk about lending, as corporate sector as well as the retail sector, they continued to expand, while lending in foreign currencies also modestly grew. And what we have seen as happening to 579 affordable loans program, some 2,000, almost 2,000 new agreements were produced with 6.6 billion hryvnia. But with this, we have to understand that the areas also increased by almost 700 million hryvnia. That's all. Passing back to Maria. Thank you, Maria. And let us talk about the fiscal sector around taxes. Yuri Gaidai, the senior economist, a senior analytics worker. Yes. Okay, let's first about the tax revenues. The picture is quite stable. Throughout the third month in a row, we see the growth of tax revenues. In September, they amounted to 117.9 billion hryvnia, and that is versus previous September, it's plus 26%. Mostly, this is due to excise taxes. We have 95% more revenues in September this year versus September previous year. You can see this on the graph. You can see some special articles. Also, VAT is growing. Now we can see the growth of the internal VAT as well as the export VAT by 16.5% equally. We also know that the Parliament has adopted, and the Verkhovna Rada chairman signed the taxation package that will increase the taxation load. We believe that it's not really optimum, but it will be joining the efforts to increase the budget, increasing the military tax. It will be retrospectively applied of October. The other new taxes starting from next year. Excise revenues increased. Then 50% of profit tax for banks. This will influence not only the state budget but the local budget as well, because part of these revenues account for and constitute the local budgets. Let's see the spendings. We can see that the spending within 8 months, looking at the data available now, They amounted to some 2.2 billion hryvnia, 2.2 trillion hryvnia, if we don't look at the expenses related to the defense. That's 12.6 year to year versus previous year, again, not including in-kind military support. We see that defense and security expenses added 15.3%, although in August they were down by 9 billion hryvnia to July. If we forecasted that there will be some growth because of the tension at the front and because of some good tax revenues, but so far this growth isn't seen. Let's see what will be in October. We have reached the record high levels. Debt service expenses amounted to 49 billion hryvnia. We did not have this level since the beginning of the invasion, as far as I remember, at least from 2023 for sure. The next slide, please. Let's talk about the foreign funding. It fell in September almost to zero. It was expected by the government and by analytics. Ukraine has received only $11 million as a Council of Europe loan, but the biggest question is the second part of the grant from the United States, from $3.9 billion. It was supposed to be disbursed by the end of September in the US, which actually ended in September, but since we're not seeing any active public discussion of it, we assume that this process is still ongoing, and we do count that this financing will be received by Ukraine until the end of the year, because without it, we will not be able to close the needs in financing. We also expect that this current level of coverage of the needs with this outside financing, 69%, it will still go down by the end of the year. Of course, we expect that this grant from the United States of 3.9 billion will be received. That's all from my side. Yes, with financing, the situation is quite sad, but I want to invite the last speaker from CES, Volodymyr Lander, the senior analytic of CES, who will give us some and we'll talk about our today's special subject. Thank you, Maria. Let us traditionally start from the energy sectors, because they talk about energy sector when they think to which extent the forecasts on growth of economy will materialize. In September was more or less controlled. The electricity imports from abroad amounted to still quite a lot of 437 gigawatt hours. That's 5% less than previous months. But then on September 28th, Ukraine for the first time started exporting small amounts of electricity. So exports in September amounted less than 1 gigawatt hours, because on October 2nd, electricity exports exceeded imports. And for the first time since April, Ukraine became a net exporter of electricity. That's why we believe that we are entering autumn in a quite controlled situation. Of course, the terroristic country nearby can introduce changes, but at the moment we can say that in the middle of fall, there are no scheduled power outages. In the last rolling blackout in Kiev took place on September 12th. The Minister of Energy, German Galushenko, predicts that Ukraine can avoid scheduled power outages in the winter, but again, the experts are not so optimistic on the one hand, and on the other hand, they have more ideas ranging from planned outages within like 4 hours per day in the optimistic scenario in case the Russia doesn't continue its attacks, or up to even 12 to 18 hours a day if Russia continues significant attacks on energy infrastructure and if the winter is quite cold. In terms of agriculture, the seasonal decline we can see in September. Grain and oilseeds exports decreased by 15% month to month, and they amount to almost 4 million tons. The main export cultures don't change. It's corn, sunflower oil, rapeseed. The export is growing in physical values. It's important to mention wheat, whose export grew by 42%, and from the second group, it's unexpectedly juices, whose export increased by some 65% in physical volumes. Also, there is a significant share of Black Sea ports in exports. This August, it reached 79%, with another 6% exported through the Danube ports. Railway export share exceeded 10% for the first time this year for agricultural products. And this is happening not so much at the expense of big successes in the railway transportation, but rather to the main extent because there is the decline in water transport. We can see that the negative tendencies in terms of IT services continue. The IT factor is overlapping with some global situation, and we can see that exports of IT services in August decreased by 7%. Again, in terms of the statistics of export of services, we have more information coming, more lack of information coming in. So it's like $507 million in August, and that's the minimum since May 2021. In general, IT exports reached $4.26 billion. That's down 5% compared year to year. Also, we have made some summary in terms of the university applications. We can see that the number of university applications for admission to IT specialties decreased by 25%, while the number of first-year students in IT fell by 30%. To a great extent, this is explained by the demographic situation, that in general, the total number of applications decreased by 24%, but we can see that the decrease in IT sphere is even more. And this year, the largest number of students applied for computer science, software engineering, and cybersecurity. If we make some small introduction to our special topic before we give the floor to experts, I want to give some facts about the industry, which will probably not likely be new to experts, but I just want everybody to be on the same page and to understand the overall picture. So, first thing, 1.9 billion tons are produced globally, and more than 1 billion tons are produced in China. So 54% of the world's steel, of the global output of the world steel, it's China. The second is India and Japan. Overall dynamics of the previous several months is quite negative. In August 2024, the global steel output fell by 1.5%. The only thing that we can mention, when we announced our event, we asked why everything is decreasing in metallurgy, but since we did our announcement, there were some positive sectors. The Chinese government approved some stimulating packages, and they stimulated the engagement of mortgages. They decreased the norms for reserves provisions, and that has added quite significantly. As a result, the steel rebar reached a 3-month high of $484 per ton. and up to 110, the prices for iron ore turn back. The global forecasts are not so perfect. We can see that there's this excessive capacity of some 630 million tons within several years, and that is threatening the economies of open market regions. Especially India is opening new capacities. Our traditional slide about the metallurgical part. In September, the production of the main types of ferrous products fell. That pertains to steel and rolled products. As a summary, the production of pig iron was some 624 tons. The rolled steel fell by almost 15% to 504,000 tons. If we take the overall situation within 9 months of 2024 and compare the data for the previous period, we see the growth of indicators from 22 to 28% for the main types of products. But we also understand that this is the expense of some previous months, and this September's indicators, they are more or less at the same levels like the third quarter of 2024. And a separate tendency, we can also mention that in August, Ukraine had the highest exports of iron scrap, also in Poland, and then onwards to Turkey. And Turkey grows the imports of the rolled products into Ukraine. And very often, Turkey has exceeded 50% for this type of commodity and has all the changes within October to really get the highest share for Ukraine. And when we talk about iron ore market, we will talk not only about the steel. Ukraine is also a producer of iron ore, pellets, pig iron steel, rolled steel, pipes, and ferroalloys. At this slide, we can see the main indicators, both as output as well as evaluations. Based on various indicators, we have really different statistics. Somewhere the specialized associations are reporting every month. In some cases, we have to rely on some external sources of information. So I believe in more detail we will be explained by our experts. Many thanks for the attention, and let's come to our special topic of today. Volodymyr, many thanks. I was really interested to listen to you. I was following the market of iron ore, and that's a very relevant update from your side. I'd like to present our speakers, who are, I'm sure they will tell a lot of interesting about the problems, the challenges, and the possibilities of the sector. We have with us, I'm very happy to mention, we have been joined by 5 high-level experts. That's first of all Stanislav Zinchenko, director of GMK Center. It's Alexander Kalinkov, president of the Ukrmetallurgprom, an association of enterprises. These are representatives of 2 big businesses in ArcelorMittal Kryvyi Rih, Oleg Krikavsky and Natalia Sidoruk from Interpipe. And apart from the Ukrainian perspective, I'm also looking at Stanislav, knowing his views on European integration, knowing that we will have as well with us Ejid Takmisoglu, that's the energy and climate policy analyst at Berlin Economics. So we'll be hearing not only what we are hearing about the green transition by Ukrainians, but what people in Europe believe. I was very happy to see the graph that shows that 2024 has been better. I would like to invite Stanislav Zinchenko. Please, you can see how you see the market, how you see the situation. Many thanks for the invitation. I will try from top down to build the picture and to stop at the Ukrainian metallurgy and Ukrainian colleagues, because we have quite a lot of good experts with us today. I would like to somewhat follow up and also somehow challenging the previous metallurgy. The growth of metallurgy is not good, because for many it's growth, but for many it's a fall, it's a decline. It's like the average temperature in the world. So India is a major player in terms of consumption, but demand for steel has decreased this year by 1%. That's all really bad. All know, because somebody says we are already at the bottom of the economic cycle. Somebody say will go down. It's irrespective of the war. There are some commodity cycles, raw material cycles. So the key problem globally, it's the demand for steel. That's as a result of a very rigid monetary policy of central banks, as well as the result of deindustrialization of a number of developed countries, and the problems, structural problems, with real consumption, which is coming as the consequence of various failures of big countries in their industrial and economic policies. Everybody knows about disproportions. You said about Chinese, but there are some other economies. That's number one. We have the global problem. The global demand is showing it pressures everybody. It also pressures Ukraine, because we used to export 50%. Now we're exporting in iron ore products is 45-50% from what we have produced, although we are producing much, much less, and the commodity materials even more. The second very important factor we have to understand, it was correctly mentioned, there is the factor of China. In many economic conferences, they're looking at China, with China and without China, because China really changes significantly all the models. So we have to understand that as of today, within 9 months of 2024, the exports of steel from China reached the 8-year max high. So 71 million tons have already been exported from China. For this, it's 2% from their production, but for the whole world, it's like a start of the wave, because it can only coming as cheap steel from China. It comes to the Southeastern Asia. Southeastern Asia starts to move to European markets, the US and the other markets. So this wave is coming, and it's very negatively affecting. All experts are saying that this year that will be 100 million tons, like it was 15-16. And irrespective of the announcements of China that they're stimulating the demand, but that has significantly influenced the prices. For me, since I'm not a trader of steel, the prices don't mean that much. That's a result. For me, the real result is real steel consumption. That is shown in the reality. So that has influenced the prices, but this is negatively affect the European market, the world markets. So the factor of China at the expense of exports, it is very negative, and it will stay negative for the upcoming years, because as the Chinese steel companies say, we love to export, because there are a lot of small and medium, small for them, that produce 3, 4, 5, 8 million tons per year. That's small and medium steel companies. They are out on the export market for the first time, because they had a crisis of infrastructure and construction sphere. So it's a systematic factor that will influence. Next, unfortunately, we are now coming, that's one bad news globally, and now we're coming to the really bad news, that's Europe. We depend by 100%. I mean, I can't say it's 100%, but in fact, this is almost so, because this is the data for 6 months of this year, 56-58% of exports of goods from Ukraine, that's the European Union. That is, I believe, by the end of the year, it will be more, because autumn, it's the agrarian season, so I believe we shall reach in the end of the year for 2024, the overall export market will be more than 60%. You understand that any like 0.5% decrease or non-decrease in Europe can systematically influence the Ukrainian industry, exports, prices, and possibility. Because we don't have other possibilities to export, we can export, or we can talk about GMK sector only in neighboring countries, because our logistical expenses grew by 3.5 times. We can't afford to export like we did before. Ukraine, before the war, Alexander can correct me, we exported to more than 90 countries of the world. We were very much agile, and we were searching even our small markets. Now we don't have the possibility because of the expensive logistics. Even though we do have ports and partially the sea corridor, the prices remain very high. In the European Union, there is a stagnation of economy. Yes, they do show some 0.3 quarter-to-quarter growth, and they say for Europe 1.2, 1.3%, it's normal growth of the economy, but that's the overall growth. It's like, again, the average temperature in the world. The industrial Europe is falling. The industrial production is minus 1.4% in Europe, while they were expecting 0.7. So the difference is really huge. And that's at the expense of the automotive in the second place, although they're trying to correct things by protective barriers. Secondly, it's machinery, which is falling for 3 years in a row. And the German Association of Mechanical Engineers says that this year that it will be even worse. And construction is the systematic crisis, minus 2%. It will be also this year. Therefore, what does it mean for Ukraine? Why I'm saying this for such a long time? Globally, Europe, what does it mean for Ukraine? Who will be buying the Ukrainian iron ore and semi-products in case Europe shortens real steel consumption by 3% this year and by 1% in the next year? If it's not necessary, there will be declining in production. Nobody is expecting the growth of production of steel, and that means the Ukrainian iron ore is at risk, the Ukrainian semi-products are at risk. The same about Ukrainian steel products. If it's consumed less, Europe would always give preference to the local ones. It will be difficult for us to compete. So European steel production, real steel consumption, unfortunately, it is going to negatively influence not only on today's condition of the Ukrainian metallurgy, and that's why you have called what prevents the growth, because you probably thought when there was some growth, like in spring, but we now have actually the fall. There is the global fall, as we said, the European fall, because Europe is going down, and nobody expects that the European economy or the Ukrainian steel production and consumption will start to recover from minus earlier than mid or even the third quarter of 2025. That's our biggest pain and the problem that we're seeing today in terms of the situation in Europe. And shortly, apologies if I have 3 more minutes. Actually, 1 minute is left. Then I'm coming to challenges and our internal challenges that influence our steel output and our exports. It's the instability of the sea corridor. It's here, but we can see that any moment it can go away. The prices for freight, the biggest logistical expenses, it's very easy to compare with the price of iron ore. The price of our iron ore freight to China, to Brazil, it's 5, 6, 3 times more expensive. The next item, it's competition with the Russian products. Europe is decreasing the iron ore, the pig iron consumption. They have actually used up all the quota from Russia, from pig iron. It's simply cheaper than us, than ours. We understand from which reasons. And the last challenge is the trade barriers in the future. What we have already today, we can see that there are a lot of products still in the United States, and CBAM, which is expecting Ukrainian economy from the 1st of January 2026. We have minus 200 million for the fourth year, minus 1.4. So within 5 years, 1.5 billion less, and closing some factories out of 6 that remain. Many thanks for your time. Apologies that I'm not being optimistic, but this is the situation on the market as far as I see it.
Дякую,
Ready to
Станіслав.
participate in
Сподіваюся,
discussion.
що ми ще
Thank you,
повернемося сьогодні
Stanislav.
до обговорення
I
CBAM.
hope
Друзі, всі,
that
хто
we will
нас
come back
слухає,
to
будь ласка,
CBAM,
присилайте
and everybody
свої
who is
питання в
listening
наш
to
чат
us,
та Q&A. У
please
нас
send us
залишиться
these questions
трошки
to
менше,
chat
ніж
and
50
Q&A.
хвилин
We have
дискусії.
some less than 50
4
minutes of the
надзвичайно
discussion,
цікаві спікери.
and
Колеги,
there
дуже
are 4
попрошу
very
вас,
interesting
напевно,
speakers.
вкластися в рамки десь 7
Please
хвилин, для того,
fit
щоб ми
within
могли
7
ще залишити в
minutes,
кінці якийсь час
that
на
we can
дискусію, коментарі,
keep some
реакції
time
або Q&A.
for
І наступним
discussions,
до слова я запрошую
response, and
Олександра
Q&A.
Клинкова, президента
And
об'єднання
then I would like to
підприємств
ask
«Укрметалургпром».
Klinkova.
І я знаю, що Олександр, як ніхто, може
And
розказати
I know that
про
Alexander, like nobody
проблеми
else, can
галузі
talk about
узагальнень,
the
ці самі
problems,
виклики, ціни на електроенергію, на перевозки. Олександре,
talk
будь
about the
ласка,
prices for
діліться.
electric energy.
Дякую, Марія. Чудове представлення, але я буду жалітися,
Thank
що
you,
говорила
Maria,
в
for
анекдоті
great
Сара, що ти
introduction.
сказала, що тобі гірше за всіх. Тому що багато журналістів зараз
Because a lot of
бачать цифри
journalists are
зростання за
seeing
перші там 7-8
a
місяців і
lot of
говорять, що наша галузь
growth,
зростає. Вона
and they
дійсно
say that
зростає, але
our
порівняно з
industry is growing,
прошлим
but
роком,
it's
коли
growing
морський
versus previous
коридор не
year
працював. Але
when
ми побачимо,
the
що
sea
ці
corridor
темпи
didn't
зростання
work,
будуть
but we
все
see that
менше і
this
менше з
pace of
кожним
growth were
місяцем
less and less
осені. На жаль, всі ці фактори
every
сказав
month of
вже
autumn.
Станіслав, я не буду
Unfortunately, all these
повторюватись.
factors
Ми
Stanislav has
стикнулися з тим,
mentioned.
що
So we
окрім
face the
війни, у
situation
нас
that apart from
ми
the
в
war,
циклі
we are in
павичому
the
знаходимося
cycle,
глобально.
we are in the following
Наш
cycle
глобальний ринок
globally.
дуже залежить
Our
від
global
Китаю, тому
market a lot
дивлячись на
depends on
Китай, ми
China.
можемо
So
спрогнозувати, що в
looking
нас
at
буде.
China, we can
Європа
forecast what
також
will be
важлива,
happening
бо
with us.
традиційно за останні
Europe is also very important.
10-15 років десь
Traditionally,
третину
within
продукції в
10
ЄС
or 15
експортували,
years, we have
решту
exported
по
to
всьому
the EU,
світу, але на сьогодні ми
the
експортуємо
rest
80%
to the
нашої
world. But
продукції,
today,
нашого
we export
експорту
some
саме в Європейський Союз. Тому
80%
з
of
одного
our
боку ми
products
вважаємо
is
Європу
going to the
нашим
EU.
домашнім
So
ринком, а з
on the
іншого
one
боку
hand, we
дуже
believe Europe
залежні
is our
зараз від
home
Європи
market, but
і
then on the other hand, we
політики.
are very much
Тому
dependent
фактори,
from Europe, from their policies.
тому ситуація
Therefore,
залишається дуже
the
складною.
situation
Наші
remains
підприємства працюють
very difficult
зі збитками.
because we
Наші
have
всі
all the
підприємства знаходяться в
companies
режимі
working with
виживання
losses.
останні
All our
2,5 роки.
companies are surviving
Тому що
within
з
the
одного
last
боку в
2.5
нас
years, because from the
порівняно з
one
довоєнним
hand,
21 роком
compared to the
ціни
pre-war
глобально впали на
year, the prices
40-50% на
fell
нашу продукцію,
globally by
а з іншого боку
40-50%. But
вартість,
from the other
собівартість
hand,
зросла
the costs
значно,
grew
наприклад, логістика в
significantly,
4-5 разів,
logistics by 4.5 times,
що обумовлена тією ж Укрзалізницею, навіть якщо
which is
в
also explained by
євро-долар рахувати,
Ukrzaliznytsa.
то
If we
підвищення
count in
було
euro in
2,5
dollars,
рази
then
на
the
деякі види
increase was
продукції.
2.5 times for various types of
Підвищення тарифів
products,
на електроенергію, про це говорив
increasing
і
fares for
директор
electric
ArcelorMittal
energy.
Кривий Ріг,
This
яка
was also
зараз в
mentioned by
Україні майже в 2 рази
ArcelorMittal Кривий
вища, ніж
Ріг,
в деяких
which
підприємствах
is
Європи, нам важко
twice as high
конкурувати. І
versus
дуже
other
важливо,
European
ми
companies.
зберігаємо
It's very
наші
difficult
трудові
for us to
колективи, і
compete, and
навіть
it's very
якщо наші
difficult for us
підприємства
to
в 22-23
keep our
році були завантажені на
teams if in
30-35%
22,
залізорудної,
23,
50% сталеві,
some
а деякі
30%
підприємства
iron ore,
були
50%
завантажені на
steel.
12-15%
Some
все рівно ми
companies were
платили
loaded
людям
with 12,
заробітну
15%.
плату, ми зберігали
Anyway, we
трудові
paid
колективи, тому що це найбільш важливо. Я думаю,
salaries
що коли
to
ми будемо
our
говорити
teams
про
because
майбутнє
people are
нашої
most
галузі,
important.
як
And
і
when
для
we
всієї
talk about
економіки України,
the future of our
після
industry, like for the whole
безпекового
economy of Ukraine,
фактору,
after the
успіху
security
розвитку,
situation,
людський
after
капітал
the
вийде на перше місце для нас.
success,
І тому
the
все це
human
збільшувала
capital
була
is
нашу
should be number one
собівартість.
issue, and that has
В
increased
цих
our
умовах, коли ми
costs
не можемо
in the
навіть,
conditions when we
більшість
can't,
наших підприємств не
the
може
majority of our
запозичити на
companies
глобальних
can't
ринках
have any lending on global markets, any funds to support their activities, to make sure that they can live to see the victory, our situation looks more and more complicated. The key risks for us is Pokrovsk, because without Pokrovsk we will be left out of this coking coal, and this will again increase costs, and will physically not be able to import a lot, because we will need to decrease the export, because the place where you can load and unload vessels is only one. In terms of energy, we're not insured from shellings, so it's very important that electric energy is available for our companies. And as Stanislav mentioned, the sea corridor can stop at any moment. These are the three risks that can pose us significant threats. So now our companies will remain on the controlled Ukrainian territory. Somewhere are producing 60-65% from the pre-war levels. They can grow to the level of 2021, but it's very difficult taking into account the competition and the growing costs within the country. But with Pokrovsk, with other factors, they can even fall twice. That's unfortunately a more realistic scenario. This will cost us up to 5 billion plus minus of foreign currency revenues, and lose 20-25 billion into the direct budget and 80-85 indirectly. So apart from these risks, what we can control, we and our government, the cost in various dimensions. It's the cost of electric energy. Of course, we need to import more electric energy. We should receive a possibility to have not 1 year, 1 day, but rather the long-term contracts for imports of electric energy. And it's very important. Plus, taxes are growing, the excise tax for diesel fuel, because we are consuming a lot of diesel fuel in our core areas. So they talk about economic reservation. I really hope that it will not end up with some additional payments to what the companies are spending on today. Plus war risks. We talk a lot about insurance for military risks, that the draft law that was initiated by NBU with the Ministry of Economics. We see even more risks, because there are some plans to introduce mandatory insurance of cargoes which are imported or exported and moved along Ukraine. That can increase costs by another 1.2-1.5%. So cost is very important, but additionally for this, we see some other factors. The exports of iron scrap to Turkey. Recently, there was even export to Pridnestrovia through Transnistria. That's the Russian enclave, and we understand the iron ore is a strategic raw materials. If we don't process it today, we can process it for 3-5 years. That's a key for the development of green metallurgy, plus sanctions against Russian Federation on our home European market, because we can occupy this place, plus reservation and problems associated with this. Now it's a frozen situation, unfortunately, and it's a special separate topic. Foreign currency liberalization is important. Access to foreign international institutions such as EBRD and World Bank, because not all companies have access to this financing. While financing from private banks, it's quite limited for us now. These are the factors that will allow us to survive and to live to see our victory. And after our victory, the key is just normal state
яка що в себе
economic policy
несе прогнозований податковий
that
тарифну політику, це
has the
дійсно незалежне
forecasted, the
НКРЄКП,
expected.
створення НКРТ на
It's an
Національну
independent
комісію
NERC.
регулювання тарифів в
It's
транспорті,
creating the
залучення
Commission
довгострокового
for Tariffs and
фінансування
Transport,
в тому плані,
engagement of
що,
long-term
по-перше, я
financing
сподіваюся, що ми
in a
будемо
way that,
достатньо
first of all, I
привабливими, щоб
understand that we
самим
shall be enough
залучати приватне
attractive
фінансування,
enough in order
але
to
хочеться
engage
мати
private
доступ,
financing.
перше, до
But we would like to have
якихось
access, first of all, to some
фінансових фондів Євросоюзу,
financial
які,
funds of the
до
European
яких мали
Union,
доступ країни
where
на етапі
they would
входження
have
в
access by
Євросоюз, навіть
countries
і
when they
коли
were
вони ще
entering
не
the
були
European
членами
Union,
Євросоюзу.
while
І
they were
друге,
still not the members of the
якусь
European Union.
почати
And
отримувати
secondly, to start
компенсацію
getting some
шкоди,
compensation
яку
of
завдала
harm
Російська Федерація. Це все
done by the Russian
допоможе.
Federation. That will
Але
all help.
найбільші фактори довгострокового ризику – це,
But the biggest
звичайно,
factors of long-term
безпековий
risks is, of
ризик
course,
і
security
людський капітал.
and human
Ми
capital.
очікуємо, що буде підтік людського капіталу після нашої
We
перемоги,
believe
на
that
жаль.
the
На жаль.
outflow
І ще
of the human
говорили про
capital
СІБАМ.
even after our
І
Так,
victory.
Олександре,
And
давайте
talking about CBAM, let
повернемося
us
до
come
СІБАМу
back
трошки
to
пізніше. Ви
CBAM
тільки не
slightly
виключайтеся, будь
later,
ласка, зараз.
but please don't
Повернемося
turn
до СІБАМу
off.
пізніше, якщо
Let's come
буде
back
час,
to
бо в нас
CBAM
реально
slightly
є
later
багато
because
дуже
really
цікавого
we
всього
have
говорити,
very
але зараз я хочу вас
interesting
попросити
things to
не
discuss,
вимикатися.
but please don't turn
У
off.
нас в Q&A є запитання від Ольги
In the
Тучі
Q&A
про
session, we have a
ситуацію
question
з
from Olga Tucha
Покровськом. І
in
я
terms of
знаю,
the
що нас
situation
слухає багато
regarding
людей,
Pokrovsk,
які
and I know we are
насправді не є
being
фахівцями з виробничення продуктивних сил в
listened to
Україні. Ви
by
могли
a
би
lot
одну
of
хвилину
people who are
буквально
not the
присвятити
professionals.
тому, що таке Покровськ
Can
для української
you
металургії,
explain what is
чому він
Pokrovsk for the
важливий,
Ukrainian metallurgy,
що
why it
там
is important,
видобувають і чим
what
це
is
загрожує? Я
being
дуже
produced
прошу вас
there,
дайте
and what
таке
is threatening
узагальнене ваше
in a
бачення.
very
Для
generalized
нас
vision?
Покровськ – це шахтове управління
For
Покровське,
us,
яке виробляє,
the Pokrovsky mining
виробляє
capacity,
найбільш
it produces the biggest
якісне
and
коксівне
the
вугілля в
highest
Україні
quality
марки К.
coking coal,
Це вугілля,
grade
навіть
K,
якщо в нас є
even if we
шахти
have
коксівного вугілля на
mines
інших
of coking
територіях в
coals
Західній
on
Україні,
other territories, like in the Western Ukraine,
якістю його
the
недостатньо, тому
quality
без
is not
цього
sufficient.
вугілля
So without
ми не
this
зможемо
coal, we
функціонувати.
will
А
not be
коксівне
able to
вугілля
function.
разом
While the
з
coking coal,
залізорудною сировиною
together with the iron ore,
це та сировина,
that
яка
is the raw
застосовується для всіх
materials that is
підприємств
used
повного
for
цикла.
all companies
Для
of full cycle.
електрометалургів, таких
For the
компаній, як
electric
Interpipe,
metallurgical companies such as
це не
Interpipe,
так, це не те, що
this is
це не
not
важливо, тому що вони
this is not
для
important
них сировина
because
це
for
електроенергія
them
і
is raw
бруд.
materials,
А для всіх підприємств
is
повного цикла
electric
це як
energy
Ростав,
and
для Арселора,
scrap,
для
but the
Метінвеста,
rest,
це
like
якраз
Metinvest,
та сировина,
Arcelor,
яка
is
критична.
exactly those
Тому
raw
якщо ми
materials which are
ми
critical.
не будемо
So
мати
if we can't have,
якщо ми не будемо мати
if we don't
української
have
сировини,
the
ми не
Ukrainian raw
зможемо
materials, we will not
виробляти
be able
кокс
to
для наших
produce
підприємств. І ми
coke for our metallurgical companies,
єдина для нас
and
вихід – це імпорт.
the
Але
only
імпорт
way
залізною
out
дорогою,
it's
він і
imports.
зараз відбувається,
Imports
але в
by
нинішніх
rail it is
кількостях
taking now,
порти
but
дуже обмежено через пропускну
insignificantly
спроможність.
because of the through
Тому ми
capacity
будемо
of
все
ports.
робити
That's why
для
we'll be
того, щоб
doing
забезпечити
everything
наші підприємства, але, на
to
жаль,
provide
я не
our
думаю,
companies,
що
but
в повному
unfortunately, I
обсязі
don't
це
see
зможемо зробити. Тому
that we'll be able to
тут,
cover
будучи
the full
реалістами,
demand.
ось така
Being
ситуація.
realists,
А можна
that is the
можна приблизно
situation.
дати оцінку,
Can
наскільки
you give
може
some
собі вартість
approximate
рости, якщо
evaluation
буде
how much
коксівне вугілля
the
продаватися так,
coal, if the
плюс-мінус?
coking
Якщо
coal
буде
is
імпортуватися
imported,
на 30-40%,
Да.
that
щонайменше, а
can
то й
go
більше,
up
тому що
by
Собівартість.
30,
тому що
40%
30-40%
in
це те, що
costs,
ми рахували, коли
because
ще було
30-40% we
довоєнні
counted
роки, а
while
зараз
still these were
логістика в нас
pre-war
набагато більша.
years.
Але
Now the
тут
logistics
питання не
is much
тільки
more
зростання
expensive.
Добре,
але й фізичної можливості
It's
доставити це
also
вугілля.
about the physical
Да,
capacity to
дякую дуже.
deliver
Я це
this coking coal. Many thanks, because I would still need to ask this question also to Arcelor and to Natalia Sidoruk, because Pokrovsk is important. We are slightly behind time. I apologize, but it's very interesting, and I really hope that we stay a little bit longer. And I would like to ask Oleg Krikavsky, who is the Director of Governmental Relations, ArcelorMittal Kryvyi Rih. It's a huge metallurgical factory, a company with international investments. Please, how do you see the markets yourself? Do we really stay at the lowest peak of the metallurgical cycle? And what steps do they see the government is taking to support business? Yes, we will be celebrating 20 years of ArcelorMittal's presence in Ukraine. I will start from the end because we started to talk about Pokrovsk. And it's not about the Покровsk coal. We are also forced to diversify our deliveries, our supplies, and that's where I would like to turn to the performance of Yuri Gaidai. I was attentively listening. He was talking about the increase of customs payments. I would like to tell you how these things are connected. We have faced the problem importing coking coal, the problem that we have probably not seen for 8-9 years is the correction of the customs value, and in our cases we see some massive cases where we have to work with. That's why the increase of customs duties, this is connected with the fact that based on our feelings, because of the budgetary deficit, they are trying to this in systematic way. They use some old methods. It's what they call the adjustment in the customs value. It's difficult to take the floor about after Alexander and Oleg, because they did explain about and Stanislav, but I would like to go back to the topic of our meeting, what prevents us from growing. Some 2 weeks ago, we were at the presentation of some new project from the government in terms of military insurance in case of military risks. And we heard a lot about the mandatory insurance. And to one of the speakers, I asked a question. When it comes to other types of insurance, the insurance of military risks by the expert agency of Ukraine, why our industry was taking out that it's not covered with insurance of military risks. And I received a reply from the representative of the government, we don't know. So because we did have access to a national bank, because the government believes that stimulation of raw materials development is not relevant, but I think it's short-sighted on behalf of the government, because in our company the raw materials is processed into the end product, and by stimulating the raw materials we are stimulating the exports of finished goods. So when we have the limited resources and efforts of the government, somehow our industry is excluded from insurance of military risks. And if we talk about DFC and IFC and other systematic programs, then first of all, we don't feel that they have an appetite which is big enough for Ukraine, and we're not seeing that this is actually working in terms of ensuring specific risks. So after the presentation of this concept, after we did it in London, we didn't hear anything special in Berlin this year. And in essence, the insurance of military risks didn't take place as of to date. Once again, this will be the key message in my performance. What is preventing us from developing? It's exactly the component of security of insurance. If it were more active on the market of Ukraine, we could talk more about some investments or reinvestments, about some growth. Many thanks, Oleg. In case we still have some time, I would like to ask you, in terms of CBAM, I would like to ask every speaker to explain about their attitude towards insurance, but that only if time remains. I would like to ask Natalia Sidoruk. She is the state authorities interacting with Natalia is the director of governmental relations at Interpipe. It is a huge production capacity company in Dnipro. Yet it's difficult after such speakers to add something really especially interesting for all present at this webinar, but every of our companies is unique.
Якщо от Олександр згадав,
And in
що
case Alexander
для нашої компанії не так
recollected that for our company, maybe it's not that important to have the coking coal, but in fact, for our company, we have great interest in terms of electric energy because we are the biggest in Ukraine electric melting complex, not only in Ukraine, but in the whole Eastern Europe. And I have seen in the chat there was a question. So what did we billions of dollars. So our complex is $1 billion, just for you to understand what we have invested. And as you understand, when we talk about this type of steel melting, as I already mentioned, we now have problems with electricity. I mean, in general, I mean, not at this particular moment, but nowadays, let's put it this way. In addition to that, this type of steel melting gives us certain advantages in the European market. Because if we talk about the green transfer, because our company, it's a company that produces the green steel. Additionally, if we talk about the problems that our company is facing, the biggest, and where it's important to pay attention to, because as Maria has correctly mentioned, it's not always we are oriented where the company's production is located. I just want to mention that one of our companies is located in the city of Nikopol, the city which is under permanent shelling, as we all know, because across the Dnieper River, just in front of us, is this Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And why I'm attracting attention to this particular part? Because we believe that nowadays, for such frontline areas, for such frontline territories, there is absolutely no assistance in economic sense by the state. Today, a lot of speakers have already mentioned regarding the new law on insurance of military risks. I would fully agree why the question is included of the export-import cargo transportation, but we also see that the concept that was put inside into this law, it has to be revisited because the proposed edition of this draft law, it defines the so-called risk zones, and these are the so-called active hostility zone, plus 100 kilometers from these zones. So it's that territory from Ukraine that will not be covered by insurance of military risks. And now, can you imagine, we are in Nikopol, in the center of very active hostilities. We have to take out our products from Nikopol. We will be going another 100 kilometers, which are not covered by insurance. And once we exit, we have already on a more safe territory of Ukraine, we have to pay for insurance. So we also raised this question for NBU, and I believe that possibly we were hurt in a way. What concerns the frontline territories, also it was mentioned today, it's a very painful topic for all Ukrainians, this topic of reservation of employees. It's possible these companies who are not in such zones as Nikopol, they will not feel what is happening in reality, because the city who is losing population, irrespective of the availability of production, availability of any business, people are just leaving the city. And with this,
виходять,
They are
звільняються з підприємств, і підприємства, які
leaving the
знаходяться у
company,
таких
and the
прифронтових
company that is
зонах,
located in such
вони
frontline
більш за все
areas,
потерпають
they suffer the most from
від втрати
losing the
працівників,
capable employees
фахівців.
who are
А
professionals.
як ми розуміємо, в
And as far as we
металургійному
understand
комплексі
from the
зазвичай це все ж
metallurgical
таки
complex,
чоловіча
it's of
робота.
course mainly the man's
З
job.
того, що для нас
And
важливо на
what's
майбутнє,
important for us for the
на
future,
найближче майбутнє,
for the
серед
closest future,
додатково до перерахованих мною питань,
in addition to the questions which I have
важливо
outlined,
збереження
it's important to have the
ліберальних умов
preservation
доступу
of
на
liberal conditions
світові
in
ринки.
terms of access to world
Це
markets.
європейський ринок,
That's the
це
European market,
американський
that's
ринок,
the American
який
market,
саме для металопродукції,
especially for the metal products,
української металопродукції застосував призупинення дії
that they would
20%
put on
мита.
hold this 20%, 25% of customs duty.
Вона
And
лише
this
до травня наступного
is
року.
until only May next year.
Дуже важливо,
Correspondingly,
щоб
it's
ця
very important
лібералізація була
that this liberalization would be continued.
І серед
And
таких, що сьогодні, я ж
among
кажу,
the
дійсно
ones
дуже багато
that
сьогодні
really
вже
we have a
прозвучало,
lot of
і
this
питання валютної лібералізації
this
також
foreign
для нас
currency
дуже цікаве.
liberalization that is
Оскільки,
also
як
very
ви
important for
розумієте,
us,
що
because as you
величезні
understand,
інвестиції, ми
these huge
привносили
investments,
їх за рахунок
we were able to
кредитів,
do
які
them at the
потрібно
expense of
зараз
the loans that we need
просто-напросто
right now to
віддавати.
pay back.
Тому,
Therefore,
як я почала, кожне
as
з
already
наших
started,
підприємств
every
є
of our
унікальним,
companies
і те, що
is each of our
інколи
companies is
є
unique, and
перевагою,
in
інколи
case
стає
sometimes
проблемою.
is an
І
advantage, sometimes can become a problem, and vice versa.
Дякую дуже, Наталія.
Thank you,
Я хотіла зараз
Natalia. I would like to
попросити
ask now
Наталію, Олега
Natalia,
і, напевно,
Oleg,
Олександра.
and
Якщо є
possibly
можливість у
Alexander, in
вас
case you have the
швидко
possibility
уточнити,
to quickly
не прямо зараз, так,
clarify, I
візьміть
mean,
якийсь
not
час собі,
immediately, but
швидко
take some time
уточнити по
to
ситуації
quickly
в
look through the
Покровську-Східному
situation
вугіллі.
in terms of the
Тут одразу
Pokrovsk, in
від
terms of the
кількох
coking
аналітиків
coal,
просто
because
запити
from some
по
analytics
підвищенню
analysts,
собівартості
there is the
металу,
question
чи
about the
підвищенню
increase of costs
собівартості цього
of metal
посівного вугілля
production,
у випадку імпорту
and in
частки
case
посівного
it is imported, what is the
які
share of this
витрати
coking
цього
coal in
вугілля
the
на
cost
виробництво і
structure,
тони
what are the
чавунної сталі ідуть,
what does it
і ті
take,
технічні
what is
запитання.
the volume
Якщо ви, будь
for the
ласка,
production of
можете
1
просто
ton of
глянути
steel.
там по своїх
Please,
джерелах, я
could you
розумію, що
check
зараз з
up
голови так
in your
одразу не
sources? Maybe
вийде
it's difficult
відповісти, але
to
якщо є можливість
reply
уточнити у
very quickly,
аналітиків
but in
і
case you can
дати
also
відповіді в
clarify this
Q&A або в
in
чаті,
analytics
то
and
я
give
була
replies
би
in
вам
Q&A or
дуже
chat. I would
вдячна, якщо
appreciate
ви
that.
таке змогли би зробити, хоча б приблизно.
In
Розумію,
case you give at least
Станіславе, що
some
це інформація
approximate
комерційна, але,
answers,
можливо, якісь
to a certain extent,
рамки
this
колеги
information is
могли б
commercial,
задати для
but maybe some
аналітиків, які
framework
намагаються
the
змоделювати
colleagues could give
ситуацію
us for
в
analysts who are trying to
відповідно,
model
напевно,
the
якогось реагування на цю ситуацію.
possibilities that are coming from
Поки
Pokrovsk.
я переходжу до
And now I'm moving
Іджита
to Ijit.
Тахмісоглу. Я сподіваюся, що я правильно вимовила
Ijit
прізвище. Перепрошую,
Tahmisoglu.
якщо це не
I
так.
hope I correctly pronounce
Іджит,
your last name.
аналітик з питань енергетичної та кліматичної політики в
Ijit is
Berlin
the energy and
Economics.
climate policy
Отже,
analyst at Berlin Economics.
про
So we will be
зелений
talking
перехід,
about green transition,
декарбонізацію і, я думаю,
decarbonization,
що CBAM.
and I believe the
Іджите, будь
CBAM as
ласка,
well.
слово вам.
Ijit, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everyone from Berlin. And thanks again for the invitation. Very happy to take part in this very interesting and important discussion. My name is Yiğit, and I'm an analyst at Berlin Economics. Today, I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking more from a medium-term perspective regarding Ukraine's steel sector decarbonization, the opportunities and challenges, and also touch upon why it's important when it comes to CBAM. Despite the ongoing challenges that the colleagues before me have very importantly highlighted, the destruction of the production assets and the capacity in steel sector, the sector still has a big potential for growth. But first, I would like to focus more on the comparisons with the European steel sector. We observe some differences, particularly when it comes to emission levels. While the European steel sector accounts for around 5% of total emissions, in Ukraine, this number is closer to 15%. And this is mainly due to Ukraine's reliance on energy-intensive and coal-based production routes, which accounted for around 94% of production in 2021 before the war. And only 6% of steel production was from electric arc furnace-based electric melting routes in Ukraine. But while at the same time, Ukraine has been investing in the last couple of years towards shifting to green steel technologies. And the situation there is that they use roughly an equal mix of primary and secondary steel making, which is blast furnace-based oxygen furnace route and the electric arc furnace routes. But overall, why does this matter for us? Because the basic oxygen furnace and open heart furnace routes are around twice as more CO2 intensive compared to secondary steel making, which is electric arc furnace. And according to our analysis, the average CO2 intensity of Ukraine steel production, considering the reliance on primary steel making, is around 2.3 tons of CO2 per ton of product, whereas the EU average is somewhere around 1.6 to 2 tons. And this difference is important as we consider the move towards the stricter carbon regulations from the EU, where EU steelmakers would need to pay higher fees when importing steel products from Ukraine with the start of CBAM payments because of the higher carbon intensity of Ukrainian products. And this creates an urgency in a way for green investment in steel sector in Ukraine, because in the scenario where EU does not provide Ukraine with perhaps a temporary relief from CBAM obligations, this will make Ukrainian steel products less competitive and will limit the ability of Ukrainian companies to export goods to the EU in a competitive way. And as also Mr. Kalenkov highlighted, Ukrainian metallurgical sector exports 80% of its products to EU. So this will have a big impact on export revenues. And this makes investing in green steel more urgent. But despite these challenges, moving forward, multiple factors still favor Ukraine's green steel potential, which are the iron ore resources, the renewable energy potential, and also, although currently, as Mr. Zinchenko highlighted, the instability of the sea corridor, still the proximity to EU green steel markets via the Black Sea ports and the railways are still favorable factors for Ukraine moving forward. Why high quality iron ore is important? Because in the low carbon steel value chain, it is a very important raw material that is used in direct reduction routes, in which by 2030 in EU, it is expected to have around 85 million tons of capacity, and which Ukraine can offer to export high-grade iron ores. And again, the two advantages that Ukraine has here is the geographical advantage and the high-quality iron ore reserves, although currently, as Mr. Zinchenko highlighted, is the prices are quite high in Ukraine, but we're hoping that in the midterm, this will turn towards Ukraine's favor. And when it comes to green steel, what are the options that we have in terms of production technologies for the Ukrainian steel sector? Well, there is a lot of noise in the discussion when it comes to decarbonizing steel sectors, where you have many different green steel technologies being promoted as a silver bullet option, but most of these options are at very early stages of maturity, and there are only few pilot projects worldwide. And their widespread application is not expected until after 2030, and they are currently are quite expensive. And those technologies I mentioned are basically hydrogen-based DRI-EAF route and the carbon capture, storage, and utilization, which is a very not so proven method to decarbonize emissions in steel sector, basically. Another option many steelmakers consider, although not a green steel method, it's not a green steel technology, is basically relining the blast furnaces to increase its lifespan, but it potentially delays the adoption of low carbon technologies, because in the short term, given the current conditions in Ukraine, for example, it could seem like a reasonable option. But at the same time, it involves significant investment, and it creates a risk of lock-in effect because of the sunk cost that is invested. So this can, in a way, result in like stranded assets. for steelmakers. The realistic option here in short to midterm is electric arc furnace-based production routes. In terms of the economics of it, when we compare the green steel technologies, it is the cheapest option in terms of the capital investments and has a very high emission reduction potential, which is around 70% less intensive compared to blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace route. But of course, in the case of Ukraine, this will depend first on the restoration of the electricity supply, because EAF routes uses electricity quite intensively. And the situation with the electricity deficits in Ukraine is expected to, the restoration of it is expected to take some time. And in the medium term, as the costs go down, and if the business case of it improves, obviously, the green hydrogen-based DRI-EAF route in steel production it actually poses the best potential, but this will take quite some time because first we need large quantities of green hydrogen available, and also costs need to go down. But of course, for all these to happen, for Ukraine, significant financial support will be needed because investment conditions right now are not quite favorable. The country risk profile is quite high due to the war, and it would be difficult for steel makers to secure financing for green steel projects. So financial support mechanisms or support from public organizations can help reduce this risk, or perhaps international development banks could make credit available at improved conditions with long maturities, cheaper rates for investments that lead to decarbonization in steelmaking specifically. Overall, to conclude, the destruction of Ukraine's iron and steel making assets gives Ukraine almost a bittersweet opportunity in this way to rebuild the steel sector, but in a green way. The country is very well positioned to supply European green steel markets if the current challenges are improved. And it's not only about rebuilding what is lost, but also that Ukraine could become a key player in global low-carbon steel market. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion and your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Igit. And my first question to you.
Thank you very much. So my first question to you, we heard what Stanislav said in the beginning of his report, that now in Europe, the demand for steel is actually falling. So what are the prospects for Ukraine, who is proposed to make big investments in re-equipping its metallurgical productions to fit the European green standards? So what are these prospects that really in Europe there will be enough demand to this metallurgy? Maybe I would like to ask her to reply like in 1 minute, and then all the members of the discussion, please also comment on CBAM.
The floor is yours.
The floor is yours, Igit.
Thank you. So I'm not the best person to answer when it comes to the market conditions or demand projections of steel in Europe, but in the case where right now, as Mr. Zinchenko highlighted, that the steel demand is decreasing in Europe, which raises the question: is it actually favorable to now do such big investments in Ukraine to transition the sector into green steelmaking? I can only answer this in the positive case where demand in Europe picks up and increases. That will obviously require Ukraine to be able to comply with the regulations that are being put in place, and when that time comes, obviously this is a decision that needs to be done in short to midterm, but the steel fleet of the country should be ready to address that need and meet the demand of raw materials that are that supports Ukrainian European green sector, steel sector, or also in terms of the steel products that would be less CO2 intensive if the fleet is steel fleet is converted into more green technologies.
Thank you very much, Igit. Давайте спробуємо по одній хвилині
Okay, let's
відреагувати
try
на
with 1 minute to
питання CBAM
respond
і
to
зеленої сталі.
CBAM
Перейдемо
and
потім
green
питань
steel,
з чату.
and we will come
Станіслав.
back to the questions from chat. Stanislav, please.
I would like to comment about
Можна, будь ласка,
еще-
українською? Можна, будь ласка,
добре,
українською? У нас синхронний переклад.
Я іджета, вибачте, да. Дивіться, ми робили наші
See,
дослідження,
we
великі,
have done
підготували
our
його
research. It was
майбутнього
based
зеленої сталі України.
about the future of the green steel in Ukraine. First of all, I would fully agree with Ijit that the Ukrainian steel industry, the GMK Center, it is supporting the green metallurgy because Ukraine can become the supplier of key raw materials for green transformation of the steel industry. They are great fit. We will be able to send some 20-25 millions of DR grade, and that's necessary for Europe to produce green steel. And based on our evaluation, based on the decarbonization plans of the Ukrainian steel giants, Ukraine potentially can supply 6 million tons of low carbon steel because there are various grades, so low carbon steel. But for this, we need to make investment and access to the European foundations, climatic funds who are financing decarbonization. Over the last 1.5 years, the European Commission gave European factories more than 12 billions for subsidies. Ukraine actually needs less to decarbonize its steel industry. We will help Europe to make its contribution to climate neutrality.
Дякую дуже, Станіславе, колеги.
Many thanks, Stanislav, colleagues, Natalia, Alexander, Oleg. If anybody else wants to comment how you're planning the green transfer.
Дозвольте, я
Allow me
сьогодні
to
вже
quickly,
згадувала, що
because already
насправді,
mentioned
якщо ми
today
говоримо
that in
саме
reality,
про
if we talk
викладку сталі,
about
то
the steel
наше
melting,
підприємство повністю
our company
відповідає
is fully
цим
compliant with these requirements
оскільки
since
наш електросталеплавильний
our
комплекс був
electric
побудований
steel melting
десь
complex
близько
was
10,
built some
12 років тому,
10-12
і він
years
одразу
ago,
будувався
and
за
it was
всіма
immediately
вимогами,
built,
які існували
take
на
into
той
account
час
all the
у
requirements to
Європейському
comply
Союзі.
with all the requirements that existed in the European Union in terms of the green transfer.
Зрозуміло, що
Of course, it's
все
clear
розвивається,
that
умови
everything is developing,
стають
the
іншими,
requirements are
більш
evolving,
жорсткими, але
more
насправді для нашої
harsh,
компанії ми
but
не
for our
бачимо
company, we don't
дуже великих суттєвих
see
викликів
any
щодо
significant
питання CBAM.
risks in terms of CBAM.
Дякую, Наталя.
Thank you,
Олександра,
Natalia.
буквально хвилина, і
Alexandra,
потім Олег
just
з
a
побажаннями.
moment, and then Oleg if
Так,
necessary.
дякую за можливість виступити.
Thank you for the
Перше, ми
possibility to
всі,
say it. First of all,
ми всі хочемо, щоб
we all
наша металургія
want
була більш зеленою,
that
менше
our
викидів
metallurgy
CO2. Ми
would be
рухаємося в
more
цьому
green,
напрямку і
less
плануємо інвестиції в цьому
CO2
напрямку.
emissions, and
Але
yes, we're moving in this
нам
direction
треба
and planning investments, but we
зважати на
also
безпекову
need to
ситуацію
take
зараз
into
в
account the
країні,
security
коли ми
situation
зможемо
in the
всі ці
country
інвестиції
when
провести.
all of these
Тому
investments can be really done.
в частині
Therefore,
CBAM
in
ми
part
ведемо
of CBAM,
переговори
we are
зараз
conducting
вже
negotiations
з
now
нашим урядовцем, той же Качка
with
сказав, що
our
він озвучив цю проблематику європейським
officials.
чиновникам, що
Mr.
нам треба
Kachka said that
розуміння,
he voiced
коли
this
і як
concern
будуть
to the Europeans. We have the
застосовуватися до
understanding
українських
how
підприємств
and what will be applied
грошові
in terms of monetary
грошові
stimuli
виплати по CBAM є
in terms of
в
CBAM
директивах,
as related to the Ukrainian
які
companies.
обумовлюють CBAM
There are some directives
форс-мажорні
that
обставини, і для нас дуже
also
важливо
explain that there are force
співпідставити
majeure
можливості наших
circumstances,
компаній
and it's
з
important to
з
overlap the possibilities of
європейськими
our companies with the
європейською планкою.
European
Ми порахували,
plans. We have
Станіслав,
counted, and
що
Stanislav was
будуть збитки для
counting,
наших
that we will have
компаній,
losses for our
збитки
companies,
великі, тому ми хочемо тут
big losses. That's why we want
з
equal
європейськими
conditions,
компаніями.
equal conditions
Так,
with the
треба
European
такий
companies.
вибросами,
That
квотами, яка є в
emissions
Європі,
trading
була,
system
і
that
це
is in
Станіслав
Europe, and Stanislav
аналізував
also
дуже багато
analyzed
раз.
it many
Це просто
times.
прихована
This
система
is
субсидування
just
галузі, тому що там
a
виділяється в
hidden
середньому
system of
більше ніж на
subsidizing the
мільярд
industry
євро більше
because
безоплатних
any free of charge quotas are allocated for more than 1 billion. If the companies would receive this level of support from the European Commission, then we can much quicker meet all the requirements of CBAM. So that's why we are moving in this direction. But we want this to be a fair play with our European competitors.
Да, дякую всім. Принагідно
Many
нагадую, я думаю,
thanks to
що
everybody. I
більшість
would like to
учасників
remind you,
сьогоднішнього
and I
івенту
believe that
в
the
цій
biggest
дискусії.
number
Якщо хтось
of
не бере, то
participants,
долучайтеся.
if
Зараз
somebody is not
проходять переговори,
participating,
да, про
because we now have negotiations
основні
ongoing about
статті
main
АКІ,
articles of
ЄС,
acquis,
і, власне, такі, я думаю,
EU
конкретні
acquis.
речі теж
So these
можуть бути
expert
під час цих
things
переговорів
can be
підняті.
really important and can be
Ну,
raised
зелена
during these
металургія,
negotiations.
європейський зелений
And
курс, це,
the
звісно, все
green
дуже добре, але у нас є Покровськ,
metallurgy and the
дуже
green
хочу
course is very
повернутися українські
important, but I
реалії.
want to really go back to
Європейських
Pokrovsk
таких
because the
нагальних
Ukrainian
питань,
realities
напевне,
are
все ж таки
quite
відрізняються.
different
Я
from the
розумію
European
колег, що
ones.
в тому
I understand, colleagues, that nobody wants to
якісь
give
професійні
away
секрети чи
some
таємниці,
professional
але
secrets,
бачу кількох
but
аналітиків, які намагаються
I can see
побудувати моделі.
some
Я просто
analytics
серцем
who
відчуваю, як людина
analysts who want to build up these models.
хоче отримати відповіді
I can see that
на
the
ці
person wants to get
питання.
answers to these
Хоча
questions.
б приблизно, будь ласка,
At least
допоможіть
approximately,
сказати,
please could
які
you help to
витрати
explain
коксівного
what
вугілля на виробництво однієї
are
тонни
the
човуну до сталі.
consumption of coke and coal in the production of steel, and what could be the change of costs for steel in case we lose own production. At least some approximate figures, plus minus, negative and positive scenario. Stanislav, maybe you know? Alexander?
Я хочу почекати, поки компанії скажуть.
I want to wait until companies are saying, because it depends for each company. I mean, to the extent that they're using this. That's why it's a more confidential information. And in case there is a request, then we, of course, will talk to our companies. If they do give us some data, we will aggregate it so we don't have the breach of the confidentiality, and we can give you this aggregated data. Great. This is a great idea, possibly that really deserves a special publication or a special analysis, because that's very important. I can also see that Oleg wrote about Olga. Please look up in the chat. We have 3 minutes left. There is one question I also wanted to ask. Let's see. From the chat. Apologies. There was such an active chat. That is really inspiring. So the question is from Yulia. What is the forecast in terms of volumes of production for steel and rolled products based on the results of the year? In the end of the summer, you said that there was expected 16% increase. Whether these expectations can materialize. First of all, about the volume of production. If now we have over 7 months, we have the growth of 34 and 30, of course this figure will go down because the comparative base is different. The C corridor started to work in the end of last year, not in the volumes right now, but it still worked. So whether we'll be moving, I mean, the more we go into the year, we shall end somewhere at 13-15% of growth this year. That will be 7.3 million tons. But in 2021, we produced 3.5 times more. We can catch up some 10 million tons in case those companies that remain on the controlled territories. If everything falls, in addition to Pokrovsk, this will be much less. It can be 3-4 million tons. The level of investment, no other industry in Ukraine would invest as much as metallurgical industry did. They counted various figures, but it's really the case. The number two, it's very important for us, for the Europeans, this green metallurgy. For them, it's important to feel what place Ukraine can take on the European economic market. And it's also concerning smart specifications. It is also for them, it's important. They see this, but for them it's competition, this green steel. They are more eager to green pellets, DRH. These are the products of iron raw materials that they can use. Number three, I have seen about the level of salaries. They are quite high. Until the full-scale invasion, the level of salaries was comparable to Poland at some bigger companies in Europe. And this is like the biggest salaries in production in Ukraine. In all dimensions. Actually, we had even larger salaries than in the European Union and Eastern Europe. Then next is about iron scrap. I don't want to really go deep into that. Unfortunately, we have some of the iron scrap going to Transnistria, but a lot of it is going to India, to Turkey, and that is done only because our controlling bodies give the possibility not to trace, not to pay export duties, and such exports is taking place. That really is putting at risk the development of the green metallurgy that we're talking about. But we are ready to discuss this separately. In any case, our industry, technologically, it is much more technological than much more than machine building that exists in Ukraine. We are ready to invest into our production. We're seeing a lot of risks, but under some normal economic and industrial policy of the state, I believe we will survive and we will continue to work further. But unfortunately, no, we're not seeing this, and that creates additional risks. Thank you. Alexander, many thanks to you. We will be finalizing our today's event. Honestly, I really hope that some of the profile journalists maybe was listening, and maybe we'll turn to Alexander for comments about writing about the meaning of Pokrovsk, that everybody has to talk in Ukraine. I would like to also ask Stanislav, hopefully this is the bottom, that nobody will knock us from the bottom further, but we will jump off from the bottom, and our demand will pick up, the risks will not materialize, the corridor will keep on working, and this will be hopefully with the security risks, and the metallurgists will be able to ship their products for exports inside the country. And the other thing which I wanted to mention, thanks to Denis for the good example, that the Russian tanks, thanks to armed forces, or that the Russian tanks are turning into iron scrap. I want that it's as much scrap as possible of that kind, and to make sure that happens, please donate to Leleka Foundation. Leleka does tactical medicine, gives it to the front, saving the lives. So please do donate to Leleka Foundation. Please help the army and have a free and safe evening. Many thanks for your participation.